the High Court has blocked the deportation of dozens of Tamils back to Sri Lanka. The unprecedented move on the eve of a repatriation flight from the United Kingdom to the capital, Colombo, came as lawyers argued that just being Tamil and having been in Britain rendered them likely to face abuse and torture. Today's ruling could have far-reaching repercussions for future deportation cases and the UK's relations with Sri Lanka. Here's our foreign correspondent, Jonathan Miller.
East Ham in London's East End, home away from home for some of the 120,000 Sri Lankan Tamils in Britain. The long civil war in Sri Lanka, in which tens of thousands of Tamil civilians were killed, and the 3 years since that war ended, have led to a surge in those seeking refuge here. But asylum is hard to get. You have to prove you're at risk. Those who can't are sent back. At 4 p.m. tomorrow, another British government charter flight was scheduled to forcibly return up to 60 failed Sri Lankan asylum seekers. This afternoon, frantic efforts in the High Court to stop it paid off. 2 senior judges rebuffing the government, ruling it unsafe to send them back. It is unprecedented and precedent-setting. For 18 months, Channel 4 News has reported on the risks facing Tamils in Sri Lanka, where the torture of those suspected of having a militant past is widespread.
The British government needs to seriously rethink its approach to the asylum claims that are made by Tamils, Sri Lankan Tamils, but also some non-Tamil Sri Lankan nationals, because we've had situations in the recent past in which the UK has forcibly deported people back to Sri Lanka who have then been tortured and ill-treated. The government has a flawed system for assessing Tamil asylum claims. It needs to urgently review it.
This month, the UK Border Agency admitted for the first time that 15 Tamils it had returned to Sri Lanka had been tortured. All 15 had escaped back to Britain and had been granted asylum on the strength of their claims. Malar was one of them.
The types of torture varied from stopping serving me food and water to beating and kicking me. Often they put a gun to my neck and threatened to shoot me. They would rape and sexually abuse me. They treated me like a dog.
Why did this happen to you?
I had to face all of this because I was deported from Britain.
Sri Lanka's 27-year-long Tamil insurgency was defeated in May 2009. The UN says more than 40,000 Tamil civilians were killed in the last few months alone. The abuse of Tamils has continued as the security forces work to extinguish the embers of rebellion once and for all. The government of President Mahinda Rajapaksa has become ever more authoritarian. Human rights groups say, with one voice, that Tamils are at risk. Channel 4 News has obtained a letter from the government's legal advisers to the Court of Appeal, sent last Friday, setting out its position for today's hearing on the planned removal flight. The government's tone was defiant, insisting it was safe to send these Tamils back. The letter states that the UK Border Agency draws its Sri Lanka country information from a wide range of reliable sources, including the United Nations, the Foreign Office, human rights organisations and the news media. Then it dismisses as generalised evidence forensic submissions from 3 of those human rights groups detailing allegations that 64 people returned to Sri Lanka from Britain were tortured. Astonishingly, the letter states that even if the documented allegations are credible, in statistical terms they form only a fraction of the total returns undertaken by the UK to Sri Lanka in the past 3 years. In other words, even if it's true that people being sent back to Sri Lanka are being tortured, it's not that many of them. This afternoon, the High Court took a very different view to the government. A tribunal is currently working to update country guidance on the safety of sending failed asylum seekers back to Sri Lanka. Today, the judges said that in the light of that, it was not safe to send people back now. I met Shah. He was a student in Britain. Last year, he went back to Sri Lanka off his own bat to see a sick relative.
They electrocuted me and hammered me with poles and cables. They burnt my back with a heated iron rod. Unable to bear the pain, I signed a document, and they left me in a dark room.
Human rights workers say that if this happens to students on holiday, failed asylum seekers are much more at risk. In the months of reporting this story, we've repeatedly sought to discuss this issue with the government. Not once has either the Immigration Minister or the Home Secretary granted us an interview on this matter. Instead, we've been palmed off with bland statements, and this time is no exception. Where we find individuals are in need of our protection, for example, if they're at real risk of being tortured or ill treatment on return, we will give it, this statement says, adding that the UKBA keeps the situation in Sri Lanka under constant review and that, in its view, not every Tamil asylum seeker requires its protection. Now the High Court has fired a shot across the government's bows. The new country guidance, when it's published later this year, will examine whether Tamils who've protested in this country against the Sri Lankan government are safe to be sent back, and indeed whether it's safe to send any Tamil back to Sri Lanka at all. Today's ruling won't mean that Tamils saved by the judge today will suddenly be granted refugee status. They won't. The government is appealing this landmark judicial decision, but today its judgment has been seriously questioned.
Jonathan Miller reporting when we asked the Sri Lankan government about the allegations of torture in Jonathan Miller's report. In a statement, its High Commission in London said that it regrets that once again Channel 4 has asked us to comment pre facto even before its programme is aired and without being told precise details of what is due to be broadcast. Going by your past record, it said, it is highly likely to be another spurious piece of theatre. In addition, the timing of your release appears to be a continuation of your sinister campaign to attempt to discredit Sri Lanka.